The Tim Hortons on Burrard Street smelled like burnt coffee and wet coats, the way it always did in November when Vancouver decided the sky was a personal problem. Callum Marsh was fourth in line, his last $40 folded into his jacket pocket beside a letter from Pemberton Freight that he had not yet been able to read a second time. In front of him, a woman in her mid-30s stood at the counter with her wallet open, turning it over with the particular stillness of someone who already knew what she would not find. She had a 6-year-old boy beside her, one hand on his shoulder, and she was speaking very quietly to the cashier, the kind of quiet that has nothing to do with volume. Her card had been declined. She was trying another. The boy was looking at the glass case of Timbits the way children look at things they have already been told they cannot have. Callum stepped forward and set 2 20s on the counter. "I've got it," he said. "Whatever she's ordering." She turned. He looked at the cashier. "Whatever they want," he said. "Keep the change." He stepped back to the end of the line before she could speak. He picked up his coffee when it came, nodded once to the boy, and walked out into the gray morning. If you believe that the smallest choices are the ones that find their way back, stay with us. What happens to Callum next will change everything you think you know about how things work out. The drive from downtown to Burnaby took 35 minutes in that traffic, which meant Callum had 35 minutes to think about the letter before he had to think about his daughter. He parked on Springer Avenue, turned off the engine, and sat Marcus Lee, Plant Operations, Pemberton Freight Solutions. Position eliminated as part of a broader restructuring. We appreciate your 8 years of dedicated service. His name was wrong on the letter. They had written Marsh, first name blank, as though the system that generated it had forgotten he was a person. He folded it along the existing crease, put it in the glove box, and went inside. Zoe was at the kitchen table with a library book open in front of her and a bowl of dry cereal she had poured herself. 9 years old, dark-haired like her mother had been, one sock on and one sock inexplicably missing. She looked up when he came in and read his face the way children of single fathers learn to read faces early. "You're home early," she said. "Meeting's wrapped up." He kissed the top of her head. "Where's the other sock?" "I don't know. It went somewhere. Socks do that." She looked at him for another second. He went to the refrigerator before she could look longer. He pulled up his banking app while she went back to her book. $312. The Pemberton severance would clear in 10 business days, 2 weeks of pay, which was less than he had hoped and more than he had feared. He had 3 weeks before rent came due. The math was tight in a way he had run before during the year after Claire, and he knew how to hold it without looking at it too directly. "Dad, yeah, can we have waffles tonight instead of pasta?" He opened the freezer, half a box of frozen waffles, a bag of mixed vegetables, and a tub of margarine with the lid not fully closed. "We can have waffles." She went back to her book. He stood at the counter for a moment with the freezer still open, letting the cold air think for both of them. They had waffles. They watched 40 minutes of a nature documentary about humpback whales. Zoe fell asleep against his arm on the couch before the whales had finished migrating, and he carried her to bed without waking her, which had been possible for fewer and fewer years and would stop being possible soon, and he knew it and tried not to think about it. He lay on the couch afterward in the dark and thought about the woman at Tim Hortons. Not her face, exactly. The way she had held her son's shoulder while the card was declining, not tightly, just steadily. The way you hold something you cannot afford to let feel your own fear. He had held Zoe that way once in the hospital, when the resident had come back into the room with a different expression than the one she had left with. He had been 34 years old, and he had held his daughter's shoulder and kept his hand very still. Some things you know how to do without being taught. You just wish you had not needed to learn them. Her name was Nora Ellison. She was 38 years old, founder and chief executive officer of Ellison Supply Partners, a mid-sized logistics consultancy headquartered in the Marine Building on Burrard, and she had been standing in that Tim Hortons line because the SkyTrain had been delayed, and she had 20 minutes to kill, and she had not eaten since 5 that morning. She had also, as of 3 days earlier, had all 4 of her business credit cards suspended by Meridian Trust pending a fraud investigation that was almost certainly not fraud, and almost certainly the work of a competitor who had found a compliance gap in the way her firm processed third-party invoices. She had 2 personal cards still active. She had not thought to bring one of them. She had enough cash at home. She had not thought she would need it. The man who had stepped forward and put $40 on the counter had been in a canvas work jacket with the Pemberton Freight logo faded on the left breast. He had not looked at her when he paid. He had looked at the cashier. He had walked out before she could say anything useful. She had her son's hot chocolate and a breakfast sandwich she hadn't ordered because the cashier had added it to the 40 without being asked, and the change, which was $11 and some coins, had been refused. That evening at home, she sat at her desk after her son Marcus was asleep and thought about it in a way that she recognized as unusual for her. She was not a woman who thought long about strangers. She ran a company. She thought about contracts and risk exposure and which clients were going to be difficult before they knew they were going to be difficult. She was good at reading systems. She did not understand why a man in a faded work jacket had given $40 to a stranger and then walked away without waiting to see what it did to her. She looked up Pemberton Freight Solutions. The restructuring announcement was on their website, dated that day. 47 positions eliminated. A photograph of the Burnaby facility. She read it twice. She called the operations manager the next morning. He was a careful man, the operations manager. He answered her questions. People answer questions from someone who sounds like they are used to being answered. Marsh? Yeah, 8 years. Forklift lead, then shift supervisor last 2 years. Why? She said he had left something at a coffee shop and she wanted to return it. The operations manager said he didn't give out home addresses. She thanked him and called her office manager instead. Her office manager had worked with her for 6 years and had a particular talent for finding information through channels that did not technically require anyone's permission. She had the address on Springer Avenue by early afternoon. She drove there after picking up Marcus from school. She left him in the car with a podcast about dinosaurs that he liked. She knocked. The man who opened the door was the man from Tim Hortons, and he went very still in the way of a person who does not understand yet what is happening. She held out 2 20s folded together. I wanted to bring this back, he said. It was a gift. It wasn't a gift. You didn't have it to spare. I had it to give. That makes it mine to give. She looked at him. He was not what she had expected, though she had not been sure what she had expected. There was a child's drawing taped to the wall inside the door. A whale, she thought, in crayon blue with a smile that whales don't actually make. She did not put the 20s away. She held out a card with them. This isn't charity, she said. It's a thank you. I don't need a thank you. I know, she said. I'm giving it anyway. He took neither. She set the card on the railing by his door and walked back to her car. She had made it to the bottom of the front steps when she stopped. From where she was standing, the door still open behind her, she could see past his shoulder into the front room. There was a child's coat over the back of a chair. There was a small bookshelf. On the top shelf, lying flat with its spine out, was a copy of the Canadian Logistics Review. She recognized the issue because she had been interviewed for that issue 18 months ago, and there had been a sidebar piece on supply chain restructuring strategy that she had read 4 times and cited internally twice. The author's name on the sidebar spine was too small to read from the doorway. She had not needed to read it. She stood there for 3 seconds. Then she walked back up the steps and knocked. He opened the door. She said, I forgot to thank you properly. She looked at him steadily. Something in how she was looking had changed, and he noticed because he was not a man who missed things. She went back down the steps and got in her car. She sat for a moment before starting the engine. Her son in the back seat took out one earbud and said, Who was that? Someone I needed to find, she said. She drove home. At 11 that night, she opened her laptop, looked up the sidebar piece in the back issue she kept in her office filing cabinet, and read the author bio a second time. Callum Marsh, formerly senior analyst, Redwood Supply Consultants, Vancouver. She stared at that for a long time. She did not call him the next day. She called her lawyer instead, and then 2 of her board advisors, and then she sat in her car in the parkade under the Marine building for 20 minutes not calling anyone. On Thursday morning, she texted the number she had found through a mutual industry contact. Straight, no preamble, coffee, matchstick on Broadway. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. If you don't come, I won't ask twice. He came. She was there first. No laptop, no bag on the table, just a coffee and her hands around it. She had dressed in the way of a person who is not trying to look like anything in particular and has succeeded. He sat across from her. He ordered black coffee. He kept his jacket on. I looked you up, she said. I know. Then you know why I'm here. Tell me anyway." She did not look away when she said it. "Meridian Trust has suspended my firm's accounts on the basis of a compliance dispute. The real issue is that a competitor, Galton Integrated, filed a third-party audit trigger against my invoice processing system 14 weeks ago. The audit hasn't found anything because there's nothing to find, but Galton's lawyer has been using the suspension as a public narrative. 2 of my anchor clients are now sitting on contract renewals they were ready to sign in September. If I don't resolve the audit pathway issue before the end of Q4, I lose those contracts, and if I lose those contracts, I lose the company." He drank his coffee. "I read your piece in the Canadian Logistics Review," she said. "The sidebar on audit trigger manipulation in mid-market supply chains. You described this exact mechanism. You called it a paper vulnerability that real firms were going to face within 5 years." She paused. "You wrote it 6 years ago." "I wrote it because I had already seen it once," he said. "A distributor in Kelowna. They lost the company." "I know," she said. "I reached out to the former owner. She told me who wrote the piece." Callum set down his cup. Outside on Broadway, a bus went past in the gray morning with its windows fogged from the inside. "I drive a forklift now," he said. "Drove. Past tense as of 3 days ago. I'm home before my daughter gets off the bus. I do that on purpose. I'm not asking you to come back to anything permanent. You're about to." She did not deny it. 6 weeks of contract consulting. Full documentation control stays with my legal team. Your name appears on no filings, no public-facing material, nothing the regulator touches. Non-disclosure on both sides. If it doesn't work, you walk, and I owe you the fee regardless. $80,000. He looked out the window for a long time. "You have a son," he said. It wasn't a question. "Marcus. He's 6. The Pemberton letter cleared my schedule," he said. "It didn't change what I do with my mornings. I'm at the school bus at 8:15 and I'm there when it comes back at 3:30. That doesn't move. It doesn't need to move. I'm not saying yes. I'm not asking for yes today." She stood, pulled on her coat, and picked up the tab before he could reach for it. She left. He sat with the rest of his coffee and the small specific feeling of a problem he had already started solving in spite of himself. That night, after Zoe was in bed and the apartment was quiet, he pulled a banker's box from the hall closet that he had labeled in black marker 3 years earlier and not opened since. Inside were 3 things he had kept and 1 thing he had forgotten he kept. A Redwood Supply lanyard, a printed copy of the Canadian Logistics Review piece, a photograph of the Kelowna site, taken on the day the locks changed, and at the bottom, a printed email chain he had forgotten entirely. Correspondence from 4 years back from a compliance researcher at a Toronto firm, asking for permission to cite the piece. The signature at the bottom was from a junior analyst named Preston Galton. He sat on the closet floor for a long time. He called her at 7 the next morning. "I'll listen," he said. "I'm not promising anything yet." There was a small breath on the other end, not quite relief, something steadier. "Saturday," she said. "I'll send the address." Her firm occupied the 7th and 8th floors of the Marine Building, and the document room on the 8th floor had a keypad on the door and a long window that looked out over Burrard Inlet. On Saturday morning at 8, Callum walked into that room for the first time. Nora was there. So was a woman in her early 60s with close-cut silver hair and a yellow legal pad, who was introduced as Patricia Vane, Ellison Supply's compliance officer for 11 years, keeper of the document archives, and, Nora said, the person who had flagged the audit trigger pattern 6 weeks before anyone else at the firm had understood what it was. Patricia shook his hand with the grip of a woman who had long since stopped waiting for anyone's permission. She poured coffee without being asked and sat at the far end of the table. Nora pushed 3 manila folders toward him. "Everything Galton's team filed with Meridian, everything we filed back, everything the audit committee has corresponded on since week 1. He read for 90 minutes. He read the way Patricia had watched people read when they actually understood what they were reading. Not taking notes, not marking pages, just moving through it at uneven intervals, with the same expression on his face the entire time. He stopped once to look out the window at the inlet. He closed the last folder. "You have a mirror problem," he said. Nora looked at him. "Galton's filing is structured to look like a routine third-party audit request," he said. But the specifics he cited, the invoice processing timestamps, the third-party categorization codes, they're cited in an order that only makes sense if you already knew which internal documents to look for. He didn't guess. Someone with access to your document management system told him where to look and in what order. Patricia set down her coffee cup. The sound in the quiet room was very deliberate. "I don't want to name anyone yet," Callum said. "There are 3 people who had the access and the timing. I want to confirm one before I say it out loud." Nora said very quietly, "Take whatever time you need." He stayed for 3 more hours. That evening, at his kitchen table, he opened his laptop and spent 2 hours going back through the Preston Galton email chain, which he had photographed with his phone from the old printout. He read it differently now. The junior analyst who had asked permission to cite his piece had spent the next 4 years at a firm called Tidewater Advisory, which Galton Integrated had acquired 16 months ago. The acquisition had been friendly. The integration had been complete. Someone at Ellison Supply Partners had known Preston Galton before he was Preston Galton of Galton Integrated. Callum did not sleep well. He ran the math instead, not the audit math, which he could solve, but the other math. Nora Ellison's 2 anchor clients represented, by his estimate of her firm's size and structure, roughly 60% of her annual revenue. Her staff list on the website showed 14 full-time employees. If the contracts fell through before year-end, she would have to let people go before February. 14 people, some of them in the kind of mid-career positions that take 18 months to find again in the Vancouver market. He had seen the Kelowna distributor lose those contracts. He had seen the owner, a woman named Dana Houle, give a short speech to 12 people in a parking lot in January. He had not been there. Dana had described it to him on the phone later, but he had been able to picture it exactly. He called Nora at 7 the next morning. "I know who it is," he said. "Can you get me the email server logs for the last 6 months?" She was quiet for 1 second. "Patricia has them," she said. She pulled them on her own initiative 2 weeks ago. She was waiting for someone to ask. She knew. She suspected. She didn't say it because she didn't want to be wrong. He drove to the Marine Building on Sunday afternoon. Patricia was there. She slid a thick folder across the table without ceremony, flagged, organized, annotated in her small, precise hand. The logs showed 23 outbound attachments over 14 weeks from a single machine. The destination was a Gmail address constructed from a phrase that looked like a name but wasn't. 2 layers of forwarding put it at a domain registered to a numbered company in Alberta, which, when traced through the provincial registry, was a wholly owned subsidiary of Tidewater Advisory, which was now Galton Integrated. The machine belonged to a senior account manager named Vance Ridley. He had been with Ellison Supply for 4 years. He had a client relationship with Tidewater that predated his hiring by 11 months. Callum sat with the logs for a long time after Patricia left the room to get more coffee. He thought about what to do next. He did not pick up the phone to law enforcement. That was not the fight he was standing in. This fight was regulatory, contractual, and required a meeting with Meridian Trust's audit committee before the end of Q4. What he built over the next 10 days, he built carefully and in pieces. The first piece was procedural. He drafted a formal rebuttal to Meridian's audit findings that reframed every cited invoice processing irregularity in its correct technical context, with timestamps, source documentation, and a chain of custody analysis that showed clearly that Ellison Supply's system had not generated the irregularities. They had been introduced through the third-party interface that Vance Ridley had been managing. The second piece was structural. Working with Nora's outside legal counsel, he drafted a new invoice processing framework that closed the compliance gap Galton had exploited, not because the gap had caused wrongdoing, but because closing it removed the argument permanently and showed Meridian's committee that Ellison Supply was not a firm that waited to be told where its vulnerabilities were. The third piece was the tripwire. He embedded a document audit clause in Ellison Supply's internal access protocols that automatically flagged any outbound transmission of client-facing documents through a personal device or unauthorized interface. The clause was retroactive to the server log start date. It made the last 14 weeks of Vance Ridley's activity impossible to explain as accidental. On the Thursday before the Meridian meeting, Patricia came into the document room at 8 in the morning and set a small green folder on the table in front of him. She sat down. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I owe you something I did not give you when you walked in last Saturday." He looked at her. 11 years ago, before I came to this firm, I worked for 3 years at Redwood Supply Consultants in the compliance division. You were there for the last 8 months of my time. You won't remember me. There were 12 of us on the compliance floor, and your work was mostly with the senior partners. She paused. I'm not telling you this for any reason except so that you know that when I pulled those server logs 6 weeks ago, I was not guessing at what I was looking for. I knew what this kind of filing looked like because I had read your piece in 2018, and I had worked adjacent to the person who understood it best. Callum was quiet for a moment. I don't remember faces from that office, he said. I'm sorry. You shouldn't apologize, Patricia said. I'm telling you so that you know I have been doing this from the inside of the work. Not as a favor to you, I didn't know you were coming. She opened the small green folder. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten page, a legal pad, the kind with the yellow lines. The handwriting was careful, the kind that belonged to a person who had decided long ago that neatness was a form of respect. 3 lines near the top of the page: find the redwood piece. Supply chain audit trap. Before Galton's Q4 deadline. Below it, in the same hand, author C. Marsh. That's Nora's father's handwriting, Patricia said. Gerald Ellison. He founded this company in 1991. He retired 4 years ago. He has been watching Galton acquire Tidewater from the outside, and he has been worried about his daughter's firm for 8 months. She paused. He found your piece on his own. He called 2 compliance consultants in Toronto about it and discovered both of them had Galton connections. He called a 3rd firm in Calgary that was too closely held by people Gerald didn't trust. He was working up to calling you directly when he had a stroke in September. Callum was very still. He is recovering, Patricia said. He is not well enough to be here. But he left this notebook with me in August before the stroke because he said if anything happened to him, he wanted someone inside the firm to know what he had found. She looked at her hands. He did not ask me to contact you. He wanted to make contact himself. I am telling you this now because I think you need to know that the reason you are sitting in this room is not only Nora's instinct. It's her father's research, done from a hospital chair with a legal pad and a phone he has to hold with both hands. She closed the folder and slid it across to him. He doesn't know you are here yet, she said. She is going to tell him on Sunday. Patricia stood. She gathered her legal pad and her coffee cup and let herself out. Callum sat with the green folder for a long time. At 11 that night he called Nora. She answered on the first ring. They were on the line for 28 minutes. They talked for less than 5 of them. The rest was the particular silence of 2 people who have understood something at the same time and don't need to perform the understanding. He came in through the building's side entrance on Hastings Street every morning, took the freight elevator to the 8th floor, worked in the document room until 3:15, and was out the door by 3:30. He made it to Springer Avenue by 3:50, on the days traffic moved, which was most days. Zoe never missed him at the bus stop. On the Friday before the Meridian meeting, he went up to Nora's office on the 8th floor at 7 in the evening with the final draft in a single folder. She was standing at the window, her back to the door, looking at the lights across the inlet. The North Shore Mountains a dark edge behind them, the way Vancouver always looked in November when the fog hadn't come in yet. He set the folder on her desk. She didn't turn around immediately. My dad called me this afternoon, she said, from the rehab facility. He wanted to know if Patricia had given me the notebook. What did you tell him? I told him someone was already working on it. She paused. He cried. He doesn't do that easily. Callum stood 1 step back from her shoulder and didn't say anything. After a moment she said, he built this firm without anyone. My mother left when I was 4. He ran the firm and raised me and built something that lasted. The idea that someone was going to dismantle it. She stopped. He didn't let it happen, Callum said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, go home to your daughter. He went home. He made Zoe macaroni and cheese from the box she liked and let her watch an extra 20 minutes of television and tucked her in and read her the chapter where the Velveteen Rabbit learns what real means, that being real takes a long time and isn't something that just happens, and she fell asleep before the end, the way she always did, and he was glad, because the end of that chapter had always been harder for him than she needed to know. At midnight his phone buzzed. Meridian confirmed tomorrow at 10. I need your signature on 2 documents beforehand, notary required. She works Saturdays. I can come to you, 7:30? Fine, he wrote back. He did not sleep much. At 7 in the morning he was in the kitchen in old jeans and his gray Burnaby firefighter's sweatshirt. The one Zoe had given him 2 Christmases ago because she thought firefighters were brave and dads were firefighters, and he was making waffles because it was Saturday. Zoe came downstairs at 7:28 in her pajamas with the cloud print and stopped at the landing. "Daddy," she said, "there's a car outside." "I know, Bug. It's a work thing, a good work thing." The doorbell rang. Zoe got there before him. She opened the door, looked up at the woman standing on the porch, and tilted her head in the way she tilted her head when she was making a decision. "You're the lady from the coffee shop," she said. Nora, who had not been ready for this, went very still. "Dad told me," Zoe said. "The part where you needed Marcus to have hot chocolate." "That's the right lady," Nora said. "You should come in," Zoe said with the authority of a 9-year-old who has decided something. "We're having waffles." Nora came in. The notary arrived 8 minutes later, a methodical woman with a canvas briefcase who stamped 2 signatures, accepted a cup of coffee she drank standing at the counter, and was out the door in 11 minutes. She left behind the particular silence of official things being finished. Callum set down a plate of waffles in front of Zoe. He set one in front of the chair Nora was sitting in. He sat down with his own plate. "We have maple syrup," Zoe said to Nora in the tone of a person making an important announcement. "The real kind, not the fake kind. Dad says the fake kind is a betrayal of where we live." "Your dad is right," Nora said. Zoe nodded. "That's what I said." She told Nora about the whale documentary. She told Nora that humpback whales sing to each other across hundreds of kilometers of open ocean, and that she thought that was the most impressive thing anything had ever done. She asked Nora what the most impressive thing was that she had ever done. Nora thought about it seriously. "I once talked a client into buying a warehouse they didn't want," she said, "and then sold the land 3 years later for enough to save 9 jobs. Zoe considered this. Did the client mind? He thought it was his idea by the end. "That's pretty impressive," Zoe allowed. They ate for 40 minutes. No one said the word Meridian. No one said the word Galton. No one said the word Ridley. Outside, the November sun came through the kitchen window, in the pale flat way it came in Vancouver when it came at all, and it lay across the table without asking permission, and nobody asked it to move. At 9:20, Nora said she needed to go. Zoe walked her to the door because Zoe had decided this was the kind of guest you walked to the door. When the car had turned the corner at the end of the block, Zoe turned to Calum. "Is she coming back?" He crouched down so they were eye to eye. "I don't know, Bug. I hope so." She thought about it. "Me too," she said. Then she ran upstairs to brush her teeth. The Meridian Trust Audit Committee met on Monday at 10 in the morning in a glass-walled room on the 14th floor of their offices on Georgia Street. 9 chairs, 7 committee members, and 2 attendees. Preston Galton, in his capacity as the filing party, and Vance Ridley, in his capacity as Ellison Supply's account manager for the disputed invoice categories. Patricia Vane stood near the door with a folder and an expression that did not change. Nora opened the meeting. She did not raise her voice. She read a prepared statement into the minutes, 2 paragraphs. The compliance rebuttal had been filed with Meridian's Audit Committee at 8:02 that morning. The new invoice processing framework had been registered with the BC Securities Commission at 8:47. Ellison Supply Partners had further prepared a chain of custody document addressing the origin of every flagged invoice irregularity. She nodded to Patricia. Patricia walked the length of the room and placed a slim folder in front of Vance Ridley. He opened it. He read for 11 seconds. Nora said very quietly, "You have until the end of business Wednesday to tender your resignation voluntarily. Legal has the details. You'll find them on page 3. Ridley stood. He did not look at anyone. He walked out with his shoulders straight and his face blank, which was the face of a man who had already decided what the next 3 months of his life would look like. Galton, still seated, looked at the folder without opening it. The door at the back of the room opened. Callum Marsh walked in. He was in a charcoal jacket Nora had pressed for him. She had left it with a note on the document room table on Friday without saying anything about it, and a dark blue shirt he had ironed himself at 6 in the morning. He carried one folder. He stopped at the corner of the table nearest the door. Nora said, "For the record, I'd like to introduce the author of the 2018 Canadian Logistics Review Analysis on Audit Trigger Manipulation in Mid-Market Supply Chains, Mr. Callum Marsh, formerly Senior Analyst at Redwood Supply Consultants, Vancouver." Galton's face did not move. Callum opened his folder. He took out a printed copy of the piece, not the version from the magazine, but the original draft, with the author's edits still visible in the margins. He set it on the table. "You built your filing strategy on the vulnerability I described in this piece," he said. "I spent the last 10 days building the defense I wrote about in the same piece. I've seen both of them in the same room now." He paused. Formally withdrawing your complaint before the end of this meeting would be the efficient choice. Galton looked at the printed piece for a long moment. He said, "The committee will receive a formal withdrawal by end of day." The chair of the audit committee confirmed this into the minutes. The meeting adjourned at 10:41, 31 minutes. 3 weeks and 2 days after a Tim Hortons on Burrard Street on a Thursday afternoon in late November. Nora Ellison walked Callum Marsh down the corridor of the 7th floor of the Marine Building. She stopped at the corner office, the one that had a view of the inlet on 2 sides, and had been empty since her firm expanded into the 7th floor 2 years ago, because she had not yet found the right reason to put someone in it. She opened the door. She held out a keycard. "Director of Compliance Strategy," she said. "The board approved it this morning. Full partnership track after 12 months. The role is yours if you want it." He looked at the keycard for a moment. "This isn't about the $40, he said. "No," she said. "It's about the man who put the $40 down and left before he could be thanked. That's not a man who does things for what they come back as." He took the keycard. He walked the perimeter of the office first, the way he walked a room he expected to be in for a long time. He stood at the window for a while. The inlet was the color of pewter in the November light, and a container ship was moving very slowly toward the port, and the mounts on the north shore were beginning to collect snow. He sat down at the desk. He opened the top drawer out of habit, the reflex of a man taking up a new place. Inside, neatly folded, was a $40 bill. Beside it, a small card in Nora's handwriting. The date, the name of the coffee shop, nothing else. She had never spent it. He looked at it for the count of 3. He did not pick it up. He closed the drawer quietly. She was watching him from the doorway. She did not say anything. He did not say anything either. That afternoon at 3:50, Zoa Marsh came through the lobby doors of the Marine Building in her red puffer vest, holding the hand of Patricia Vane, who had collected her from school because Nora had asked, and because Patricia believed that children should be walked to important places. Nora was waiting in the lobby. She crouched down so they were at the same level. "Hi, Zoe." Zoe looked at her with the careful, steady attention that 9-year-olds give to things they are trying to understand. "Are we doing waffles again Saturday?" "I'd like that," Nora said. "Same rules about the syrup." "Same rules," Zoe said with the tone of someone confirming a treaty. Callum stood 2 steps back and watched. When Nora straightened, her hand brushed his for half a second. They both looked at the floor and then didn't, and neither of them said a word about it. And then the 3 of them walked together toward the elevator, and Patricia followed, and the lobby doors closed behind them. And outside on Burrard Street, the November rain had stopped without anyone noticing. He had put $40 on a counter for a stranger on a morning he hadn't been able to afford it. She had handed him a key to something he hadn't known he was still looking for. Neither of them said the word for what it was. They had both lived long enough to know that the things worth keeping rarely announced themselves.